8 themes, 8 days, and we are on day 5 of the Remembrance journey. Today's is detangling my ego, and this theme for today is and detangling your ego in the process to forgiveness, in the process of forgiveness. And today feels different than any other day, which is interesting because I feel like this is such a key part to the healing journey, to the growth journey, to moving forward. But I think it's also such a key part to remembering what I have access to and what is inside of me. Um, because I feel like forgiveness involves recognizing that nothing was taken, but it's rather the perspective we're holding and the feelings that we're keeping. And so I called this detangling my ego because I know that in forgiveness, there are blocks to um, forgiving within our egos, right? And I'm realizing that my ego wants to cling to old narratives and it wants to cling to pain and anger because it feels like it's safer there, but it also feels like it's a lose lose situation, right? Like, well, if I forgive, I'm gonna lose, and if I don't, I'm gonna lose. So either way, I'm just gonna choose what puts me in more power or what's more comfortable, right? What's more safe, what's more in the comfort zone that I'm used to. Um, my ego is not familiar with the identity of loving freely. My ego is used to um, loving freely, having sacrifice, and it being that I'm giving parts of myself away. I'm gonna read something to you guys that I wrote down today after my. Okay, I fixed the mic. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this because this is like a general I don't know what I was trying to say, but this is a message that I generated from my ego after my meditation for today in relation to Remembrance Day 5. My ego is afraid to release the anger and pain inspired narrative because it feels that love is the same thing, that vulnerability is the same thing, anger and pain. Love has meant anger and pain to ego, not truth, clarity, justice, freedom, or peace. So ego feels like, so why would I let this stubborn egoic pride that I have in unforgiveness and the narrative of victim go if I'm still a victim in love? Again, it's that energy where my ego feels like it's a lose lose, right? Either way, I'm a victim. It's the perspective my ego is holding. Ego believes it's a lose lose, not a win lose. Self loving pride moves in a new narrative of pleasure and divine justice through boundaries and gratitude. Ego fears giving up the victim story because being the victim makes others bad, and ego doesn't want to forget that and get hurt again. But ego can give up the victim story and still honor the truth of who people are and what they did with boundaries. And I feel like that's what my ego is like, okay, wait a minute. Let's verify this first and then, right? Because I feel like my ego is not completely not on board, but my ego is definitely like, okay, but wait. Like there's something still here I need you to see, and I feel like it's that, right? What it still wants me to see is what they did for what they really did, acknowledge the boundaries that must be created, that must be acknowledged, and honor the truth of who they are and even who I am. Ego feels being a victim is better because then ego doesn't have to change and take a risk on feeling something new, which is love. Love has been used against ego, so ego is afraid to love freely. Those that have heard it because then, oh, ego is afraid to love freely those that have heard it because then who protects ego? But ego is still protected in love. And so from that, you can see like between my heart and my ego, there's definitely a discrepancy, right? There's definitely some space there. But that's just the kind of information that you can receive from your ego and your heart, even in regards to forgiveness. And I think it's important to talk to both parts of you in that process, because both parts of you are important, both parts of you are valid, both parts of you are needed. And when you forget about one part over the other, it can create this tension and this inner conflict where there doesn't have to be any. And so I realized today that like my ego just wants me to understand it more. It's not completely against forgiving, but it's not just saying, okay, let's just go, like kind of like my heart is. And so there's a need for me to allow myself to acknowledge the old narrative and the old story for what it is, as far as the people and the situations, but also even myself, right? The old story of me and the new story of me. And even I feel like thinking now, like how I want to live and how I want to feel and how I want to be. Who do I want to show up as? How do I want to exist within the world? Do I want to carry this in my mind? Do I want to carry this in my heart? And I think that's the interesting part of this energy today, because it's like I'm feeling that processing. I'm feeling that shifting. I'm feeling the questioning. I'm feeling that discrepancy, and even that communication about the discrepancy, which is creating the space in me that's like, oh, okay, there's something here. Okay, there's something I can work with. And I feel like in forgiveness, it's even about forgiving yourself. And that's what I thought about too. Like, I feel like it starts with me more than anyone else, forgiving me for. And it's funny because at first, when I heard this, I'm like, when I thought about this, I'm like, forgiving me for what? Like, what did I do? But in that itself is still making me the victim, right? Because it's not giving me any power. If I just say, oh, they did everything and they have all the power, but that's not really true. Again, it's about my perspective, right? The meaning I'm giving. And so I feel like there's a need for me to forgive myself first for believing the lies, for perpetuating them as well, for being unforgiving to myself, for making mistakes within myself. It's like, and that's another thing. Um, Everyone makes mistakes, right? I've made mistakes. These people have made mistakes. And so it's just like, it's not really about not making mistakes or making mistakes. It's just about the understanding you choose to grab from that, how you choose to go about that. And I think we can often focus on forgiving others without really thinking about ourselves and where we come in with that. And so even like considering my heart, I'm like, okay, I can see where my ego is like, well, hold up, because I know that my heart can be very soft and it can love freely and it can be, quick to just kind of not forget, but like mend and let go and like love without a further thought, without a second thought. And so this conversation with my ego is really allowing me to realize where I have forgotten or went into confusion, or where I have not completely expressed my truth, or where I have felt like I needed to argue my truth or debate my truth instead of just accept it in my mind and in my ego versus only kind of in my heart, but then allowing my heart to even at times confuse me. The question for today, day 5, was about what boundary I feel I would need to set that would change everything. And the boundary that came to mind was, I don't debate my truth. And in that, I was like, there it is. There's the information, right? My ego is trying to let me know that it wants me to get clear on my truth. My ego is trying to let me know that it wants to be sure that I have boundaries. My ego is trying to, like, again, my ego is trying to protect me. And it's not only trying to protect me by not forgiving, because it's open to forgiving. I feel that. But my ego is not just going to blindly forgive like my heart might. or might have even, right? And that's part of the forgiveness too, right? Giving people so many chances when they didn't deserve it, giving people so many chances when there was no change, giving people so many chances when I knew who they were, I saw who they were, but in my heart I ignored it, even though in my mind I knew better. And so again, it's that energy of my ego wanting me to understand the purpose and key and boundaries, and not to just forgive in my heart and then kind of get foggy or confused or return in my mind, which then can then translate to my heart. And so it just feels like my ego really cares, and I feel like that's important, right? That's key. Our egos really care when it comes to forgiveness. And that's oftentimes why you have blocks toward it, and why you do have to detangle your ego, because your ego will have this narrative going. It will have this story. It will be uncomfortable. It will not want to change. It will have these certain things where it's like, ooh, 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 and you're going to have to be like, okay, what are you trying to say here? What do you need to let me know? What am I missing? What's happening? Right? You'll have to make it a conversation versus something where we just override our ego, or where we bypass our ego, even opposite, right? Our hearts. And so I feel like I'm realizing that I need both parts to move forward, and I need both parts to forgive. And I don't want to move forward with just one part or the other. I want to move forward with both parts. But that means I have to be in communication with both parts. And I feel like most of my life I've honestly lived more in my heart, like more in, this kind of fantasy land. But now I feel like my ego is like, okay, like that's cool or whatever, but like I need you to understand this. I need you to see this. I need to make sure of this. My ego is just like, let's make sure we have that protective, um like, just let's make sure we have that protection in order and clarity before we just go ahead and jump the gun and say, let's forgive. Because in the past, right, which is where that ego is still trying to operate from, I have been one to be kind of foggy or forgetful, give many chances, let things slide, lack boundaries, sacrifice myself. And so my ego is really trying to tell me, like, remember that you have access to boundaries. Remember what they are. Remember who you are, not just in this remember who you are, but in like a genuine, like truthful way. Like, who are you? What do you stand for? What do you give meaning to? How do you want to live your life? Like, let's not just, again, that energy of like forgive to forgive, right? Let's actually realize what we're forgiving. Let's realize what's actually happening, and not be quick to rush into forgiving. And I don't feel like that's what I was doing, but I do feel like there is part of me that just kind of wants it to be closed, that wants to forgive and just wants to let it go. So I can see that. But at the same time, I'm like, that's not the complete truth. But again, for my ego, I do see it. So it's important to just be, again, like I said, in contact with both parts of you, and understand that, like, through the process of forgiveness and to forgiveness, you're going to have to talk to both parts of you and leave space for both of them and create that safety for both of them. And it is uncomfortable, like I mentioned, but it's also, I feel something happening. I feel the shift. I feel things processing and moving. And that's what you want. You want to get the energy moving, because that's how you know something's happening, that you're doing something, that you're um, maintaining your alignment, realigning, configuring your alignment, realizing your alignment. Question everything. You don't have to forgive anyone just because you feel like you have to, just because you feel like it's been this long, so as to just no, right? Let yourself go and grow through the process. And it's through that process that you'll find that you have to detangle your ego, and you'll realize, oh, maybe this isn't so bad, you know?